Hello there, I'm Samuel Yang, and welcome to China Tonight.
And I'm Annie Louie.
今晚的节目有消失中的方言。
Sam，我哋唔係講廣東話咩？
不是啊。
哎呀，咁麻煩，講英文啦。
Alright. Also on the show, wait, why am I still being subtitled?
Because I can't understand a thing you're saying otherwise, Sam. You should really articulate more.
This week on the show, the troubling new bounties on Hong Kong's exiled democracy dissidents.
And can Ruby the Roo bring Chinese tourists hopping back to Oz? See?
But first, let's take a look at what's making news. And police are offering a bounty worth 1 million Hong Kong dollars for information about 8 democracy dissidents who fled Beijing's security crackdown. There was swift international condemnation as the 8 activists targeted are accused of colluding with foreign forces, a crime that can carry a sentence of life in prison. Former Hong Kong legislator Ted Hui is among the 8 activists wanted on national security charges. He was granted a special travel exemption to enter Australia in 2021. I asked him how he felt about having a bounty on his head and being pursued for life.
I'm not feeling surprised because it's not the first time that the CCP regime has put charges on me. So I've had charges over national security laws and some arrest warrants in the past 2 years. But at the same time, it's ridiculous and it's hilarious because all this just doesn't make sense. It's not like that as an activist, I'm not living underground. So I'm having a public presence, a public life. So my whereabouts are public knowledge. So it just doesn't make sense that they would be pursuing me using bounties. I think it's only showing that the CCP regime is quite powerless. That is why the only thing that they can do is to make a political gestures without any legal effects. So I basically feel safe here in Australia because it's a free country and I don't see any prospects of me being extradited back to China or Hong Kong. So I feel pretty safe here.
For more, we're joined from Beijing by the New York Times China correspondent Vivian Wang. Vivian, welcome to China Tonight.
Thank you for having me.
We just heard from Ted Hui there that this is a political gesture without any legal effects. What's your assessment and how effective will these bounties be?
I think that's generally right. Even Hong Kong officials themselves have acknowledged that there's not much that they can really do to get these activists unless they physically return to Hong Kong. But at the same time, I think that it's important to highlight that this is part of a broader trend by the Chinese and Hong Kong governments to try to extend their reach overseas and try to intimidate activists and dissidents even when they're not physically on their soil, and stop them from speaking out through spying, through harassment. And of course, there's also the possibility that they could try to target these figures' loved ones who may still be within China.
Janet Yellen's first trip to China as US Treasury Secretary will focus on strengthening ties between the world's 2 largest economies. It's the latest in a series of high-profile visits to open communication channels amid an increasingly turbulent relationship. But recently, China imposed restrictions on exporting 2 metals crucial to technology industries, the latest move in an escalating trade war. It comes as the yuan slips to a 7-month low and international markets await China's central bank's next move. Vivian, Yellen's visit comes just weeks after Blinken's meeting with Xi. Is this a sign of a thawing US-China relationship?
I think what you hear from experts here in Beijing is that it's certainly overly optimistic to think that there's going to be a substantive improvement in US-China relations. Even a thaw might be overly optimistic. I think the best that both sides are hoping for is to build a floor in the relationship and to at least ensure that there's communication. And so while there might be concrete asks that both sides would like to see from Yellen's visit, for example, China wants to see the US lift export controls, the US wants China to stop targeting US companies doing business here, I don't think we'll really see much movement on that coming out of this visit.
The United Nations watchdog has approved Japan's plan to release wastewater from the tsunami-wrecked Fukushima nuclear plant. Japan's plan has been strongly criticized by China. The Fukushima facility is running out of storage space for the water used to cool nuclear reactors. The International Atomic Energy Agency says the release will have negligible impact on the environment. Vivian, what's been the reaction within China?
So the Chinese government and the Chinese public, encouraged by the Chinese government, has been vehemently opposed to the Japanese plan ever since it was first proposed and announced. And that has not changed. So in addition to official denunciations, we've seen calls on social media to boycott Japanese products, especially cosmetics and baby products, citing safety concerns. Of course, China's not alone in opposing this. Many South Koreans do as well. But the broader context is that Japan-China ties are strained. The Chinese government in particular has really been accusing Japan of collaborating with the US and the West to try to contain China's rise.
To what's trending and sad news about the death of Hong Kong-born singer Coco Lee, dying aged 48. The Disney star and pop singer attempted suicide earlier this month and died 2 days ago. There's been more than 3 billion views on Weibo, sparking discussion of mental health issues.
Difficult to accept. She was such a cheerful and optimistic person. May you have a smooth journey ahead.
I truly can't believe it. It's really indescribable to see a beloved celebrity like Coco pass away.
I loved her ever upwardly curved lips, yet she concealed her sadness so deeply.
I can't believe someone with such a cheerful appearance would do this. You were so talented. How did it come to this?
And if you need information or support, you can contact Beyond Blue on 1300 22 4636. Or if you or someone you know is experiencing distress, please contact Lifeline on 1311 14. As mentioned in the news, there's been outrage in China over Japan's plans to dump radioactive water into the ocean.
To be honest, I'm really scared. Do we human beings still have a future?
Boycott Japanese products. The Japanese government should pay the price for their shameless behaviour.
If they think this is fine, why don't they just drink it up?
I've been drinking it up all week and I feel fine. In fact, I'm positively glowing. In China, engaging in romantic relationships when young and in school is not only frowned upon, but also actively forbidden and punished. But some are calling on the young to try romantic relationships.
I encourage all young women to engage in romantic relationships. The cost of making mistakes is low when you're young.
Well, one of the costs is a potential teenage pregnancy, but when China desperately needs to increase their birth rate, that might be a good thing.
I dated too, but why was I vilified then?
It is advisable to engage in more romantic relationships while young and still relatively naive. Later on, when you figure things out, you'll realise that being single is better.
Who's been reading my diary? I wrote that in confidence, damn it! Anyway, this all reminds me of the time I was driving a teenage relative of mine and I found myself giving life advice and saying, "You ever been in love, son?" That's when I knew my youth was over. Food security is a massive issue for the Chinese government, and climate change is making it increasingly difficult to feed 1.4 billion people.
And the government is proposing a new law to protect arable land and ensure food security.
It's a topic that's trending on social media in China as well.
Having food in hand and peace in heart is always the truth, at any time.
In addition to food security, we also need to increase farmers' income. These two issues can be addressed simultaneously.
This is all meaningless without increasing the income of farmers.
Now, a new reality TV show is creating a cult following in China.
Becoming a farmer is harvesting a huge following among netizens, but its real message is the importance of food security.
种地吧，种地吧，加油吧！怎么这还有啊？
Becoming a Farmer is a surprisingly popular reality TV show.
哇，太帅了吧！
Debuting earlier this year, 10 Gen Z idols were sent to a farm near Hangzhou City to live and farm for the next 190 days. The show is not just entertainment, but also promoting the appeal of rural life. The real message is delivered in the opening minute of the first episode, the grave challenge facing China.
我们希望每一位观众，每一个年轻人，都能充分认识到粮食安全的重要性。
Food security is a matter of national importance.
中国人要把饭碗端在自己手里，而且要装自己的粮食。
粮食事关国运民生， 粮食安全是国家安全的重要基础。
习近平总书记深刻指出，解决好10几亿人口的吃饭问题，始终是我们党治国理政的头等大事。
With only 7% of the world's arable land, China is tasked with feeding 1/5 of the world's population, producing a record 687 million tons of grain in 2022. China still relies heavily on foreign imports to feed its 1.4 billion people.
Food self-sufficiency ratio really is an economic term that measures to what extent the country depend on imported food.
The United States used to be China's largest agricultural supplier, but as trade tensions between the two countries soured, China actively sought to diversify its food sources. As a result, Brazil is now supplying 20% of Beijing's total imports. However, 3 years after slapping tariffs on each other, China's demand for US's agricultural products has more than tripled. China is now US's biggest agricultural importer for the second consecutive year.
In terms of diversifying food supply sources, Xi Jinping in particular has been doubling down on seeking international farm and agricultural cooperation through the Belt and Road Initiative. And in the context of the Belt and Road, it has held more than 100 times of international food cooperation and farm cooperation forums and conferences, as well as all sorts of other international food expo.
But diversifying import sources does not address the core of China's food security concerns.
就是以呢国内稳产保供的确定性来应对外部环境的不确定性。
To preserve its farmlands, which are shrinking due to China's rapid urbanization, the Chinese government has set a red line policy mandating around 300 million acres of arable land to be preserved at all costs. As Xi Jinping puts it, protect farmlands just like protecting pandas.
The way that Xi Jinping tried to strengthen domestic production is through 3 broader categorical strategies. The first one is to protect the farmland. The second one is to improve food and improve production quality as well as the food technology sector. And lastly, to incentivize farmers to do their job and try to boost supporting systems for farmers so that China would not necessarily suffer from a shortage of labor to engage in agricultural production. The labor challenge is not just about the conventional demographic challenge or aging society. It's also related to the disincentivized farmers from their lower income.
In the past decades, more and more young farmers are giving up on farming altogether and migrating to cities in search of better economic opportunities. Why? The Chinese food market is flooded with imported food, which are oftentimes cheaper than those domestically produced. That is, if can be domestically produced at all.
When I grew up in China, fish or yogurt or dairy product were not part of the main daily consumption. But nowadays, you go to the grocery store, these are the main or daily item. So from that perspective, given China's limited domestic production capacity, it really cannot meet increasingly expensive consumer demand.
As an old Chinese saying goes, 国以民为本，民以食为天. It means for a nation, people is foundation. For people, food is heaven.
If you look through Chinese history, every dynasty fell because of a major natural disaster triggered food insecurity or major food shortage, and that led to the topple of the regime. So from that perspective, the current Chinese leaders are fully aware of the threat of food insecurity to the regime security.
只有多实践的话，你才能够体会农业的乐趣，也能够学到这个知识。也体会到生活当中的每一粮食来之不易，当倍加这个珍惜。
In the near future, China's food security concern is set to get worse before it gets better, as it continues to battle an aging population, a worsening economy, and supply shock threats due to climate change and geopolitical tensions.
Reporter Ilham Isaac joins us now in the studio. Thanks for coming down, Ilham. Good story. Now, when I was growing up in China, I was told China is a country that's 地大物博, a big land with abundance of resources. Now China is struggling to feed its entire population. How did we get here?
Yes, Sam. So I remember when I was younger, China had this official environmental policy of returning the farmland to forests. So as pupils, we'd be on this annual organized trips to plant trees in the middle of nowhere. But now, as you can see in the story, it's all about protecting the farmlands, and campaigns have been launched across provinces all over China to return those forests back to farmland. So China definitely seemed to be in the process of recalibrating its message.
Have you actually gone and done any farm work yourself?
Yes. When I was a kid, I was visiting these relatives in the countryside just in time, as it turns out, for the cabbage harvest. So I was given this ginormous knife, which I still can't figure out what to do with them. And I literally had a field day. But as it turns out, I kept doing things the wrong way. I chopped the vegetables at their roots, therefore leaving large chunks of the roots in the soil, which obviously is not something I was supposed to do. So I got yelled at a lot.
Yeah, I think the same thing happened to me because my family has rice paddies, and I gave planting rice a go for one afternoon, and boy, do you develop some arm strength because you have to do this motion over and over again. So if anyone's looking for a bit of a team building day, I think you should come with me and we'll visit the family farm. There has been increasing concern, especially in Hong Kong, that the Chinese dialect Cantonese is at risk of becoming extinct in a few decades.
Some are worried the promotion of Mandarin will eliminate the Cantonese language. Lucy Law has more.
In Chinatown, Cantonese is the beating heart of this community. It's a very expressive language, and we can be very animated when we talk. So loud that people mistake our lively conversations for heated arguments. And this characteristic might be because Cantonese uses 6 tones. Mandarin uses 4. Let's hear the differences in Mandarin and Cantonese.
1、2、3
1、2、3
你好
你好
再見
再見
The history of Cantonese is complicated. Many theories claim the language was born between the Tang and Sung dynasties, where migrants from the Central Plains region travelled down to southern parts of China and settled in what we now know as Guangzhou, the capital of Guangdong. Other historians claim it originated centuries earlier in the Han dynasty. Some sources say Cantonese was a hybrid of the Han language and various ethnic groups from the south, called 100 Yue.
And it's not just in China. Cantonese is spoken in many communities worldwide. In Australia, Cantonese is the 5th most spoken language at home, with nearly 300,000 speakers recorded in the latest census.
There are nearly 86 million Cantonese speakers worldwide, and more than half of those speakers are from Guangdong-san, Guangxi-san, Hong Kong, and Macau. But that stat will look very different in a few years.
好多時候會講普通話啦，係咪？
咁你返到屋企會唔會都係講普通話㗎？
有時啦嚇。
有時啦。
但係我強制佢同佢講返廣州話咯。因為我唔想喺屋企都要同佢講普通話。如果佢講普通話，我唔同佢講嘅。
我哋全部都係講普通話。佢慢慢大個咗，會講白話咯，我覺得。
Some older Cantonese-speaking locals are talking to their children in Mandarin, as younger people start to lose their fluency in Cantonese.
Some of my younger cousins who are like 10, 20 years younger, they don't speak the language. At least they speak in broken Cantonese.
This switch to Putonghua, commonly known as Mandarin, is a drastic change for many.
When I was a kid growing up in China, everybody spoke Cantonese. I mean, my primary school teachers taught us in Cantonese. That was like before the promotion of Mandarin.
In 2021, China launched a campaign for 85% of its citizens to use Mandarin by 2025. The government wants one national language for national unity in the education system and employment. The promotion of Mandarin sparked controversy, with many defenders of Cantonese concerned the widespread campaign will eliminate the language. There are signs like these plastered in cities that read, "Speak Mandarin."
Those signs that say, speak standard Chinese and use standard characters, you see those all over China, everywhere. Fortunately, we don't see that in Hong Kong yet.
The government's campaign to take up Mandarin has stirred up resistance among Cantonese-speaking people.
It is such a pity to see my own language is not spoken as frequently as people of my own heritage.
So is Cantonese on its way to extinction?
I'm concerned for the future, but I think that Cantonese, if it goes extinct, it will be a much longer process. In Hong Kong,
In Hong Kong, speaking Cantonese is a source of pride and identity. Linguistics experts say the survival of a language relies on a range of socio-cultural factors, like speaking it at home, teaching it at school, and personal choice.
I think people's willingness of speaking Mandarin right now is not because the government is pushing it. They choose or they prefer Mandarin because Mandarin is like a more practical and useful variety of the Chinese language to them.
Many people believe speaking Mandarin guarantees a good future at school and work.
In recent years, there have been some efforts that were made to try to preserve the language. So I think it's improving slowly. I mean, it's not going to die, but it will take time and efforts to really preserve the language.
And preservation efforts have started taking effect. In 2015, China launched a country-wide program to preserve different languages and dialects.
whether it can succeed now is another question, but they're doing their best.
And the government says they're finding ways to preserve Cantonese. Linguistic experts are optimistic for the language's survival.
Yeah, of course, like national propaganda is a factor. I think the most influential or impactful factor would be whether this language is spoken in a household and whether parents are willing to speak the language and pass it on to their kid.
從而家開始，好似我廣東話嘅人，繼續講廣東話，希望覺得好努力。To my mum, I am so sorry for my pronunciation.
Sam, there are kids in my family who live in my hometown of Taishan, but they don't speak Taishanese, and I speak Taishanese, so it's very hard for us to communicate when we don't have a common language.
I know, same in my family. Kids are speaking too much Mandarin these days, because I speak Sichuanese, which is my dialect, which is one of the 80 dialects in China.
I've never heard Sichuanese before. What does it sound like? Well,
Unlike Mandarin and Cantonese, it's got no intonations.
Oh, no tones?
No, not at all. Imagine that the official language is Sichuanese, the whole country will sound like robots.
Well, there's so many dialects that we don't know enough about, and we need to work harder to preserve them as well. Native animals, clear blue skies, beaches and seafood. It's what Chinese tourists say they love most about Australia. As post-pandemic travel between the two countries picks up, Australia launched its latest tourism campaign.
Meanwhile, China is just as keen to increase international and domestic tourism, with some cities trying unusual methods to draw in visitors. Annie has a story.
Come and say g'day.
Up here.
Yeah.
G'day, mate.
I'm sorry, are you saying giddy up?
No, g'day just means hello.
Oh, good day.
Yeah.
It's not quite as controversial as this.
So where the bloody hell are you?
But it is a lot cuter. Sorry, Lara Bingle, but how can you argue with an animated kangaroo with the best eyelashes I've ever seen? The campaign launched in October last year in all of Australia's key tourism markets around the world. Except one, its biggest and most important one, China. The feeling is mutual, as China, having done away with its zero COVID policy, is now looking to inject its economy with much needed tourism revenue. Over the past decade, China's tourism revenue increased steadily each year. It peaked in 2019, having generated 2.9 trillion yuan, or 580 billion Australian dollars. In 2020, it had dropped by 60% and is making a slow recovery. At this rate, it will take until 2029 for the tourism economy to return to pre-pandemic levels. Domestic trips account for far more of China's holiday dollars than what's generated by international visits. About 6 billion domestic trips were taken in 2019, compared to only 32 million foreign tourists entering the country. The most popular destinations for domestic trips were Beijing, Shanghai and Guangzhou. In an attempt to lure more domestic visitors, many cities are having to get extremely creative with their advertising campaigns.
It's all about this sort of novelty factor or kind of gaining people's attention at the moment. So anything you can do to kind of gain people's attention, whether that's an animated kangaroo or dressing up in costumes, I think is really the way in which people are trying to stand out from each other.
Despite the costumes and swordsmanship, none of these people are professional actors. In fact, they're government officials. The trend started in 2020 when a tourism head in Xinjiang went viral on Douyin for dressing up in this badass Mrs. Claus-style outfit and riding a horse through the snowy countryside. Soon, officials from other cities were literally leaping to star in their own videos, including this one, featuring the Tourism Bureau Chief of Dawu County in Sichuan. The 3.5-minute epic titled Who Am I? Shows the official playing an emperor, ancient soldier, and even astronaut. Other cities in China are saving themselves the effort and avoiding the possible cringe factor in making these videos because they're already popping off organically. Earlier this year, the eastern city of Zibo in Shandong province went viral on socials because of something Australians also go wild for: barbecue. This specific dish of barbecue meat wrapped in a pancake caused visitors to inundate the town. Banks are getting involved too, with fast and cheap barbecue and e-skewer loans being approved the same day for restaurants who apply. Shut up and take my money. Why do you think barbecue in China is currently so popular?
When life gets busy, and so you want to relax after work, and I think barbecue is a good place to go with friends, families. You can like eat skewers and with some beers or like drinks, and I think that's a good way to relax.
Weekends and public holidays already prove challenging for cities, given most of China's population takes time off at exactly the same time. It has led to scenes like this, captured at a water park in Daqing last year. If there was a code brown, you wouldn't even know it. Ugh. Meanwhile, some experts have wondered if towns like Zibo going viral could help alleviate China's economic slump.
It's not just paid advertising that gets this message out there. Social media plays such an important role in terms of sending that message out and people liking an advertisement or liking a video and then resharing it with their friends and with their network. Since going viral seems to be the easiest way to boost tourist numbers, I reckon I've got an idea to get people flocking to China and Australia. So what are you waiting for? Come and say good day, or ni hao, depending on where you want to visit.
Nice moves with the sword, Annie.
Thanks, Sam. It was very dangerous. I haven't had any training, so almost cut myself.
It does look good though.
Thank you.
Now you were in Hong Kong recently for a holiday. How was it?
Yeah, the last time I went back was 8 years ago. So to me, it doesn't look like anything has changed, but the locals have said that they do notice that there aren't as many people visiting, and also they did suffer a lot through COVID and also the protests in 2019. So they're just waiting for visitors to come back, and hopefully people who watch that package will also consider China for a holiday.